Hello, and welcome to The Space Behind Our Eyes, a conversation about mental health. This conversation is in conjunction with the show Me and We, a recent exhibition at Urban Art Space. Due to the consequences of mid-March 2020, this show saw few visitors before Urban Art Space had to close its doors. But the conversation and collaboration surrounding this exhibition is alive and well in the designers who put it together. My name is Genevieve Wagner, exhibitions intern at Urban Art Space, and I'm excited to be joined by our panel, Jeff Haase, associate professor in the Department of Design, Wiliam Nickley, assistant professor in the Department of Design, Maya Jenkins, MFA student studying design research and development in the Department of Design, and Merijntje Vanderheljden, director of Urban Art Space. Quite a wonderful group we have here today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And to begin our conversation, a question for both our design folks and also our Urban Art Space folks. Can you give viewers, just like take them on a little journey of this show and how it's evolved over the past year?
Yeah, I think the first thing we should say with regards to this show is what I've been joking about for a bit, which is that this show was the longest running exhibition installation in Urban Art Space's history with the fewest amount of visitors, because we finished this exhibit installation halfway through spring break of the 2020 spring semester. And about a day before we finished installation, the university shut down. So it was then, the installation was taken down last Friday because as we are trying to move back in, there were some other issues of getting through the long hallway that is the beginning of the exhibit space in which this installation consumed. And so mental health, just like the issues that are happening right now with regards to the pandemic, is this kind of quiet thing that has come steamrolling through and has affected everyone and everything. And so we're really excited to talk a little bit about this and give it sort of a voice that it unfortunately to have, but couldn't really succeed in having while it was up while the gallery was actually closed. So that's the first thing. And then I'm wondering, Will, would you like to open up your slides and maybe do a little walkthrough of the exhibit, you and Maya, because I know, the two of you, were really huge. And actually the installation of this, not just to mention the course that actually was the precursor to this exhibit.
Yeah, sure. I think we'd be happy to show a little bit of what people might have been able to see had they been able to visit the space, in the last 6 months. So, it sounds like we'll have time to kind of get into a little bit more of the history behind the exhibit and so on as we talk. But I guess the first thing that we're seeing on the screen right now, and someone tell me if we're not seeing it on the screen, is what a viewer would see as they first entered the space, which is a long hallway from the entrance to the Urban Art Space building, I guess, on their way to the gallery space. And as you can see, there are a number of portraits hanging from the ceiling. There are also some things painted and written on the walls, and a large mountain of backpacks in the middle of the exhibit. And I think we can probably unpack some of this stuff as we move through our talk. Here, let me click through. One important thing I think a viewer would notice as they first enter the exhibit is that certain portions of what's in the space become visible or hidden depending on proximity to some of the things that are hanging. So you can see in this image that you can look through the space between this person's ears, I guess coming from the back, to see other portraits. This is a close-up of some of the backpacks that are in the middle of the exhibit, and I think at some point, I guess, when should we talk about some of, went into some of the visuals that are seen here?
Well, I think that at least before we get into maybe more details of it, do a little run through, but I think some things can be mentioned. So, just what some of the representation was, so that there is at least some association. So, the backpacks are what every student sort of carries. It's their personal life that they hangs on their back every day. And so the representation of all those was sort of those that personal matter that everyone carries. And so I think that is something that we wanted to have as a representation. And there is a lot of thought behind what and why and some of the details. I think we can go over that in more detail when we kind of have an open conversation. And then,
so Jeff, when I recalled early conversation with you and the idea that, you wanted this to be in your face, right? Something that once you entered that corridor, that, you would identify, this slide is perfect. You would identify with each of these people and individuals and feel so immersed. And then, of course, through that, identify with your own challenges, and make it inclusive, an inclusive experience. And I think that was really critical to it. And I think the long hallway kind of, as an entry space as a transition space rather, from one, entry to another entry, seemed to play in really well with the layout. And then, Will, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I think another important thing to note here would be the visuals that are available or were available in the space came from an entire day that Maya and I and the other students that were a part of creating this exhibition gathered in the Ohio State Student Union over the course of a day. So the photos are photos of Ohio State students who paused to share with us their own very personal experiences with mental health. And the words that you see on the wall are literally in the handwriting, and in several cases, little doodles and things that these same students wrote down on a page in response to some very simple prompts that were probing for what their experiences, their personal experiences and stories were like on campus. And I think this is probably a good transition into how we got to this point. But we, as students that were working under Professor Hayes to develop this exhibition, one realization we came to was that the students on campus are so visible. We see each other, and in pre-COVID times, we saw each other even more often, all over the place. If you go to OSU's campus, we're everywhere. And yet the very personal and often, the very personal mental health status of everyone is something that is often hidden in plain sight. And so that's one big thing that we wanted to make sure people were confronted with in our space.
Yeah, and so speaking of this handwritten element in the project, the responses you've collected from students at the Ohio Union, they're really just so rich and wonderful. Looking at them, I wish viewers had the chance to go up and interact with them in person, but I'm so glad we're talking about them right now. And a lot of them, I think, were in response to the question, when was the last time someone asked you how you were doing? Is that correct? Yeah. So as designers, how do you apply these very personal perspectives and these personal thoughts and feelings to your work?
Maya, tell us about that, because some of this kind of question dives even deeper into some of your own personal research as well, and what allowed your contributions to the class to be so powerful.
Yeah, sure. I could speak on that. So yeah, for my personal thesis research, I come up with all these ways to explain it, but I guess the closest way to say is seeing how design can serve the help-seeking journey for students. And this is largely based off of kind of the same scope in this exhibition, where there was kind of a disconnect between the students and like what we know about mental health about students. So I think I came into the class a little bit later. Jeff kind of had to give me the pitch on joining the class, and I was thinking, yeah, okay, this is pretty close to what I'm doing. Might as well jump on board. But yeah, during the process, we were thinking about ways in which like mental health wasn't spoken about, but it's still this very constant thing that impacts all of our lives. And part of that was gathering resources and work that's already been tailored to that kind of message. Like, for example, there was big emphasis on bringing in other narratives, different ways of telling a story about mental health. And one of the things found was from like podcasts that I tend to listen to and have been following for a while. And one notable episode was asking general viewers, how are you? Hey, really, how are you? And we come to find that we don't necessarily answer that question very honestly until we're asked, really, how are you? Because we're very inclined to just say, oh, I'm fine, or I'm good, because we still have the feelings of mental health not only being a burden on us, but we don't want to offload this burden on other people. So in that way, we wanted to create visibility of what people were literally and figuratively carrying every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, I think you answered it much better than I could, so I appreciate that. And I also think too, this is kind of funny because you brought it up at the beginning. I mean, I wasn't that aware of what Maya's research was when the class was sort of created and constructed. And it started out as me reading a book by Jenny Odell, the artist, and it's called How to Do Nothing: Resisting the Attention Economy. And so my class was pitched as us all spending one semester to learn how to do nothing. And that was just sort of the, kind of the hot topic, and sort of as almost, kind of funny at one side, but on the other one, really trying to see how to investigate this. And the first class, when I began really unreeling my idea about us communicating and really looking at the mental health thermometer and what that temperature is like on campus, and how to really dive into what it means for the student body, where resources are for help, and just looking at what other ways in which, the community of students could actually become part of an effort towards really resolving some of the issues that really create barriers for all of us. It was then that they go, oh my God, Maya's not in this studio. She selected the other one that's available this semester, but we got to get her here. And so I, myself and a couple of the students did some hardcore recruiting to get her in, but it was really valuable because, we only had one semester to really look at this topic and unpack a lot of other things that we did unpack that were part of create not only understanding a complex condition, but then sort of designed by committee, creating an installation that spoke or had some voice about what these findings were. And so for her to come in and kind of really, we were kind of already moving because she came with a year and a half or so of history of of really researching the topic around campus and being embedded in some of the community efforts that the campus had been working on, and she'd been, seeing them or studying them firsthand. And so it was really a great sort of beginning for us, because we were able to go down rabbit holes really fast, and we did. And I think that for all of us ended up being really positive, because it allowed us as designers, which we always are trying to do, is to sort of become experts and flies on the wall to what we hear and listen. It allowed us to sort of get into some deep topics really quickly, which allowed us to begin to unpack some of the complexity that this issue has. And those were really what made the course so rich, because our discussions were so deep and so rich and so personal. And that just was really something.
Yeah, okay, it really is a very complex thing to talk about, mental health. Like, it's different for everyone. But I feel that in this piece, you really chose these very like personal elements, but you were also able to make it like relatable and make it a piece where everyone can like see themselves like in this piece, and like use these words to like inspire them. And it's really wonderful. So thinking about that, like the honesty and the emotional connection that you really extracted in this piece, how did you then like translate that into making an actual like designing a show and using like the spatial storytelling to help like tell the narrative?
I could jump back to the images to kind of kick this answer off a little bit here.
Really?
So give me a second to share my screen again. Okay, so we're back to this image from the entrance to the exhibition hall, and you can kind of see, or a viewer might see in this instance, all of the photos that are hanging, while sort of obscuring some of the things that are written on the wall, which kind of are revealed as someone moves through the space. All of those people are facing away from the viewer, right? They're turned away, and then as you make your way through the gallery space, I'm going to skip ahead, looking back through the other direction, right? This space is a hallway, and one thing that we talked about a lot was how people moving through this space are on their way from the outside to a gallery space, and at some point they need to come back through in the other direction. And you get a different impression when you're looking back toward the entrance, because all of the people represented in this space are looking toward you now. And this probably means something different to everyone who's in the space. And another really important thing to mention is, because it's a long hallway and there are lots of things to see along the way, there are also moments when a person might find themselves in the middle of this journey from point A to point B, where they might find themselves faced by some people and having other people represented in the space facing away from them. And this kind of begins to touch on this idea that the relationship to people in your own journey through school as a student can be a very supportive thing. The we can be a very positive thing, or it can be something that is a stressor, right? The we can confront you in a way that is negative, where some people feel very comforted by the fact that there are others around them who maybe understand them or are loving. That's not the case for everyone. And so in the journey through our exhibition, we were hoping to create moments where people could pause and reflect on this me, my own personal journey, and the we, the people around us, in a way that made sense to them, right? And I think we had a number of discussions where we were kind of reflecting on our own journeys as students, Maya, myself, our classmates, and what we, what thoughts and reflections might happen in the space. But we also kind of realized, especially after talking to so many people who shared their own stories with us, that we needed this to be open enough so people can find themselves in our exhibition. Another really important piece of context, I suppose, for this journey. So originally, MeWe, the exhibition, was to coincide with an annual design show that showcases the work of graduating senior industrial, interior, and visual communications designers. And the people who would be going to this show were, of course, the students, but their parents, alumni, people who in many cases have been through the journey as a student at Ohio State, moving from, freshman, undergraduate, through a very personal and differentiated journey to graduation, right? And they were forced to make that journey again with all of these Ohio State students represented in our exhibit, only to then see what's at the end of the journey in this design exhibition, which we thought was really important, and then confront it again on their way back out. So that's a little bit of what I can share here. And
yeah, thank you. No, that definitely helps explain like exactly how you decided like the experience would be for viewers, not only just viewers, but people who are experiencing the show. Because it's not a show just about like looking, it's a show about like experiencing and placing yourself like in that place. So yeah, thank you very much, William.
Yeah.
Anyone else, feel free to add a bit
Yeah,
more.
so that I think was a big component of it, Genevieve, that you just talked about, which had a lot to do with this idea of experiencing, right? And that what does that mean? And how does an exhibit or a space sort of provide an experience for you based on what we've placed you in, or how we've asked you to move or manage yourself through that. There was a lot of really interesting things during this class that were uncovered through this exploration and research, and then in a sense the kind of design by committee approach of what kinds of things would represent what. A main theme that continually sort of moved through the entire class from the beginning to what Will was just talking about with regard to some of our results had to do a lot with this issue of duality. Every time we thought we found something that maybe was a trigger or a remedy to mental health, we could sit across the table from each other and argue the other side of that stance, to where triggers for some people, being alone, needing to run to a bathroom stall in order to just sort of take on anxiety there personally without anyone interrupting, might be a remedy for some people, but some others, that same exact situation of an anxiety attack or other kinds of depression or stresses, they need to be around people, and actually being alone makes them more vulnerable to some of the results of anxiety. And this kind of constant sort of duality just was always part of our discussions. And so part of what Will was talking about with this exhibit was trying to find a way to put that duality out there always at you, whether it's people faced away from you in one direction, towards you in another. The idea of the faces being cut out, so every time you walked into the crowd, you became one of them. So now you're either, it's not just them as an exhibit that you look to from the outside, but actually how, once you move into that space, do you actually become part of that population? Because now your face is right where their face is, and so you trade places with them. So it's not just about you reflecting and observing from outside, but it's also how do you reflect and observe from inside. So constantly, these were conversations that were so rich. And so when it came time to sort of, okay, get all of this information out and think about how a space might represent what do we do literally? What do we do in more of a suggestive way? And how do we manage those two things so that everyone can take away a personal component of this differently than everybody else? How do we inspire or kind of instigate those kinds of experiences? And that was really, that was just really rich you know, again, just really rich conversations and ideation and things like that that occurred with the 10 of us that were part of the class, the 10 students and myself. And we had, you know, we have just loads. I have piles, you know, 3 and 4 feet high of folded notes and stuff that we pinned up around a room that we kind of, it was a conference room, but we took it over from the first day. And, you know, anyone that had a conference or another class in there had to do it with all of our crap hanging around them because we just had stuff everywhere. And we just said, don't move and don't touch on it. But, you know, this, you know, we just really kind of went through a lot of that. And that process was just really enjoyable, stressful, and rewarding kind of all at the same time.
Yeah, a good thing to note is that for a while we had been stuck on like trying to create lenticular imagery, you know, with, if you've ever seen lenticular images, from one angle you're seeing a image and from a different angle you're seeing a completely different image based on what's put together by the different faces. So it was interesting to see it kind of evolve from the literal sense of trying to include lenticular imagery to explain our choices, like how do we depict this feeling or anxiety or depression or what students go through, to it being a lot bigger and more conceptual within the entire gallery experience.
I also love, Maya, just, you know, that it ended up being in a passageway. I love this kind of notion, like conceptual notion of a passageway, you know, like both one direction and then the other direction, with some time in between to reflect or perhaps to have accumulated different experience. So I think, you know, from an artistic kind of standpoint, it's really quite wonderful.
And you know, Merijntje and Maya, that really speaks to part of the course as well. We, you know, we're designers, and so we have a tendency to focus on gathering research and trying to be very clear about our messaging. So very literal about our messaging, because we want our clients or the users of our environments, our graphics, our products, so it's very clear as to how they use these things or how they interact with them, and that our designs have sort of an answer to those. And so as an artist, though, that's a completely different type of a scenario. We have similar processes. We certainly use similar materials. We represent ideas in somewhat similar ways. But an artist has a tendency to not try to create a distinct result in which you can only understand something in one way, but it's actually trying to create a context in which someone now takes their own personal reflection of it away or responds to it slightly differently. And it was something for us designers. We had, you know, we really had a few weeks of just sort of, all right, we're going to be artists because we got to put our design hat over here because it's in our way and it's keeping us from having a better conversation about the complexity of this with a potential viewer. If all we're going to do, like the lenticular idea, is going to just tell you exactly what it is, and you really can't have anything beyond that conversation. And so we had to really purposefully kind of stretch and move in order to get away from that. And then we're so happy, you know, I think at the end, to realize that as designers, when we kind of got out of that hard-edged context, that our message could actually be so much more rich by allowing it to be more suggestive rather than more literal. And that was a very conscious effort, and it wasn't an easy effort. You know, it's really hard, I think, for designers to want to be artists, and it's the same way. It's very hard for artists to want to be designers, and I, in my own personal research, loves to sort of play in that field and that area. And so it was very purposeful that, you know, that we brought that space to the course and to the conversation, because I think it ended up making a really rich result.
Thank you, Jeff. And that totally leads into my next question for you as a group. So as artists and designers, we use different tools for telling stories, as you were saying, and designers usually aim to make everyone understand like the exact same way, like the exact thing. And then artists aim to have everyone experience like the work differently and can take something differently away from the piece. So as a group, let's kind of break down like these different tools and how they can be used to create compassionate like spatial narratives surrounding mental health, but also I guess how these tools can, intersect, and maybe sometimes designers are using artistic tools or vice versa, as you were saying, Jeff.
We might be able to talk about the backpacks here.
Yeah,
right?
perfect.
So I'll preface this and maybe I'll turn it over to Maya, because this stemmed from an idea that kind of was really close to something you were working on in the class. So industrial designers, there's a subsect of industrial designers that design soft goods, and there are plenty of industrial designers out there that design backpacks. And usually when designing a backpack, it's about making a very functional bag for someone to take with them in their lives, and it fits into their own personal experience as a very functional thing, right? The zippers are where they should be, the straps are where they should be, it should fit your body and represent that human in a way that fits their style or something. Okay, that's one way to do a backpack. Our exhibition here also has backpacks, but they serve a completely different purpose. So I'll share my screen to show some of these, and then Maya, can you talk a little bit about the purpose of the backpacks in our work?
Sure. So the backpacks idea kind of stemmed from the overarching idea that everyone's carrying some kind of load or baggage, and in this sense, the backpacks make it a little more literal. But early on, we had the idea of lockers, because that also being associated with school, student status, that's also a place where we don't really have any insight to. That's for the individual person. So for a viewer to open the locker and see all the stuff or all the like extra things they need to carry through life, that would have been the story to tell. But backpacks felt a little more appropriate, it being a college setting. And also, that's part of seeing students every day, but we don't see what they actually carry. We see them with the backpack, but what's actually in the backpack. And to kind of expand on that idea, we wanted to note little instances of where we may get to see what's going on with an individual student. So for example, in this image, we have a few of the transparent backpacks peppered into there. So for this one in particular, this one was kind of communicating being stressed or being constricted by time, or feeling like, you're constantly running out of time as a student, or even running out of time in life as a person who's probably carrying extra baggage. But yeah, I think it's also important to note that this part of the exhibition is kind of the peak. Jeff put a lot of emphasis on creating a part of the exhibition where we realize like the climax in the hero's story. So this is kind of communicated in that way, where not only have you seen like little snippets of everyone's story on the way, but you can see it all at once, and your attention diverts to kind of the different backpacks depending on what story it is they could probably tell.
Yeah, and there's definitely something like sculptural about seeing those backpacks all like stacked together, thinking about like using artistic tools like in design. So I think it's a really great example of like, yeah, you using these tools in different ways, and you like taking yourself out of those design shoes and stepping into the artist perspective sometimes. But yeah.
So one of the things too about the backpack mountain had to do with embedded inside of that sort of mountain of students' baggage, right, to be kind of literal about it. There were some recordings that were very quiet, So as you got closer to this middle, this sort of, climax between the dualities, that you began hearing people talk, right, about things. And so we had three kind of particular audio clips. One was a poem that was by one of the students' friends who was a poet and had been doing a lot, reflecting a lot, and kind of trying to manage some of their own issues with regards to mental health. And it was just extremely powerful, the words, and he said them in his own voice. And so, it was just really strong. Another one was what Maya had brought from a podcast that's called, help me out, Maya.
Terrible, thanks for asking.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's the podcast. Terrible. Thanks for asking. And it was just a really, beautiful, powerful moment where a grad student talked about leaving her home and being at school and being so excited about things, but having a hard time keeping away from her own, keeping out of her own way, was sort of one of the quotes that was in this conversation that was just really powerful, about how even though things seem really bright around you, sometimes that doesn't mean that mentally you're really stable, and that these things are part of your life, and stresses happen even when you feel like, or you think that maybe everything should be really okay because things seem to be okay, but there seems to be a weight that you still pull around behind you that just can't be cut loose. And so, it was a really powerful statement. And then the other one was one where we gathered that day at the union, not only all of these things that you saw the students writing and doodling kind of answers, but then we went through, because there's only a handful of them on the wall here out of hundreds and hundreds of responses that we received. So many of the other ones we got in a sound room, and actually with using different voices, different individuals, and also different languages, interpreted and began sort of saying these small snippets, these answers, so that as you got closer to the backpacks, you heard everybody's sort of story. They, in a sense, sort of told them to you as if the students were speaking to you. And that was a really important component, to add that a bit of sound, so that not only were you being visually sort of cued to become part of this population or observe or reflect on it, but that they were also sort of whispering and talking to you so that these voices could be heard.
Yeah, another really important thing that I learned as a design student in this class about art making comes into the purpose of the process. In design, industrial design, the process itself is held accountable maybe in the end result, the backpack that we make. But how we get there is usually not shared, and not usually something that people reflect on. It's not important, right? But in this show, literally reading other people's words out loud, or being in the union with people as they shared their stories and we took their photos, was hard and heavy. And like throughout that day, it kind of dawned on me how probably the most important part of making this exhibition was that day in the union, because there were people who really had not been asked some of these questions in a really long time, and felt like we were there for them. And in a sense, in a true sense, I think we were. I got hugs that day from people I'd never met and haven't seen since. And it's probably a reason why every time Jeff and I talk about this, we feel like crying, because it's really heavy and important stuff.
And I would like to add, certainly from an artist's perspective, I think it's the narrative element. It's the moment where the work holds its own and can actually begin to convey these stories. And perhaps even as the maker, you can relate back to it and learn things that you had previously not understood. You know, I think that is certainly when you talk about process in arts, that's when you know you've come to some kind of point where the work is ready to be exhibited.
Yeah.
Very well stated. Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's something so moving about, like, in preparation for this talk, I went through like that file with all of the responses people wrote down. And there were times when I would like see something that I could totally relate to, or something that I was like, wow, like they really like are they really great, like placed mentally, and like they get asked this question like so often, like that's great for them. And then folks who maybe don't experience that. And it's interesting as a viewer, like Merijntje is saying, like you really do get this emotional like feeling after experiencing it, because it just feels like this very like well-rounded like capturing of different ways people experience mental health, and I think that all the work you put into that one day at the union like really paid off this entire show, because you really did capture like so much humanity in those responses.
Agreed.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention like the idea of empathy. So with artists, you know, they're trying to cultivate that in other people so that their viewers can feel it. But empathy is also, I don't feel like it's something that can come naturally to anybody. It's a continuous muscle to flex, especially in designing things. And I think coming about in this exhibition where you're hearing stories and talking about mental health, the empathy muscle is just, it got tired a lot. I can think of a lot of ways where, or a lot of points during the process where empathy was just like, oh man, I can't do this today. I have to walk away. And I think that's part of the process for us as designers, where we know how important it is to utilize that, but also I can think of places where I'm not sure if we got lost, but ways where, okay, we just have to kind of step back and regroup, because like flexing a muscle like empathy in, I guess, in your everyday regular life could be different, but in this context, it was just multiply it by 3.
And I think, you know, and we've talked about this preparing for this talk as well, just how true that is right now. And so, you know, it just makes this conversation really interesting after the exhibit sat for so long quietly, you know, flexing its empathy muscle to nobody, you know, but yet the world around it has been flexing its empathy muscle more than it can handle. And so it's just kind of really, you know, kind of weirdly ironic, right? That this all happened prior to what's going on now with the pandemic and everything. And you know, how would we have, you know, it's not how, it's like, it was impossible to know how kind of appropriate this ended up being at the moment. And so it's, you know, we're really thankful to be able to talk about that right now, because, you know, it's really a powerful, it was a powerful class, and we just really went through a lot of things. And I was just so excited every time we went to this, we had this class, you know, for that semester, because the conversations were so rich. And at the same time, I think exactly as Maya said, boy, you know, it's just we were often exhausted afterwards too. But that was something that, you know, that just felt like, wow, we must be doing something, right? You know, so despite the fact that class was about learning how to do nothing, you know, every day felt like a lot of something.
Mm-hmm. And so on that note, like throughout the whole design class element of this last fall, the group spent like so much time just like really taking a lot of care and attention to explore mental health, and understand how you're going to express it in this show. So from your experience, can you tell viewers exactly like how we could replicate these conversations in our groups at Ohio State or beyond, or just like personally? So like how to facilitate these conversations in our like spaces.
Yeah, I think let me start that conversation, but I certainly don't want to be the one that ends it because I don't know that I'm the one that should end that. As an old white guy, you know, who mental health was something I didn't know affected anybody until, you know, recently, it seems like, which is just how sort of the older generation seemed to have worked on this topic. It was so silent. But I I guess what I was when we well, where am I going with this? This like is going right back to the other part of it as well. I think that as we were working on and trying to deal with this, I set that up and then I lost my train of thought. So I'll just say that that's just the moment. I'll pick it back up again.
Well, one thing that Jeff facilitated really well for our class was that there isn't a universal approach to this. There isn't one. And I think one of the things we struggled with as designers, I struggled with as a designer in this class was, I think maybe at one point I was really looking for some new angle, something I could share with everyone that's like, hey, you know, this is what you got to do. Here's the list of resources. Here's the 18 steps to making your life better for you and people around you. And that those things exist, but that's not the whole story. And I think maybe one important point that I took away from making with my classmates to leading to this exhibition is, in your own life, you need to be reflective and figure out a way to be there for the people around you. And for those of us who were in the union that day, you know, we were there for some people for a really interesting and weird reason. We were like calling out to people, hey, we're doing art about mental health. Will you come talk to us? Which is a strange thing to do, but it worked. And I don't think it's right to say that, oh, everyone should go to their union and talk about making art about mental health, and that's how we're going to solve this. No. But having time to talk with other people and like legitimately be there when you can is what I took away from this in answer to your question.
And I think part of it is about breaking the silos too. So, you know, certainly one aspect of art is its capacity, and design too, to make things visible. So making, you know, providing an element of visibility to something that is otherwise invisible, right? So even beyond asking the question, there's no way to gauge, you know, who even in your friend group or family group, unless you knew about it, you know, was struggling with significant or even moderate mental health issues. So part of the challenge is to make this visible somehow. And making the invisible visible is not an easy thing to do. And certainly conversations around this are a starting point. And it seems to me that that's what you have spearheaded or kickstarted. And in so many ways too, and I think, you know, you probably know a bit more about this as designers, there's a kind of replicability potentially in this project, you know, a formula that you might be able to use to replicate this conversation in multiple places, or to, you know, have it go on in multiple places in a certain kind of format that you've established or predetermined. And I think there's something really exciting about that as well. But I think, you know, I think that speaks a little more to the design element. So I'll let you talk about that.
Well, and I think that with regards to that as well, you know, some of those things that we discovered was that, you know, you can't really apply one sort of solution direction to another problem. And we felt that a lot of times we saw the policy making and the desire, honest desire to help the situation, was trying to apply physical health remedies to mental health issues. And that really every time we kind of tried to go down that rabbit hole to see where there might be some solutions, as Will was saying, because the beginning of our studio was really, can we find sort of a smoking gun for all this and be able to solve it? Because that's what designers, that's how we think, that's how we start thinking. Was that really was what was happening in a lot of cases, and it was just detrimental to trying to create help, and that this issue has a completely different context, and the community and the communal aspect and the sort of transparency is more the beginning towards something that will be helpful than kind of the other way around.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think generally what I'm taking away from what you are all saying is like just starting the conversations, and like making space for those conversations to be had, which I know is difficult to do if those conversations are happening remotely these days, but definitely an important thing. So just to close us off, we have a question that was sent to us before this talk. Also, if any viewers would like to submit any questions, you can use the Q&A section at the bottom panel. But a question to close us off, were you changed in any way by working on this project? And was your own mental health affected? That was submitted by an attendee.
I'm going to let someone else answer that first.
I think I'll speak from my end of things. Having worked on this project only in a peripheral way, right, through hosting the exhibition, I think certainly over the last 8 months or so, I too have been very confronted with mental health issues, just in the arena of doing the kinds of things that I do and relearning my job. Working in a gallery, but then not having access to a physical gallery, and trying to understand, how I can still continue to do the work and offer the kinds of experiences that I might otherwise offer. And I think from that perspective and from that context, it's been so important to have open conversations, to be really vulnerable. I feel like vulnerability is the word of 2020. I use it at least 10 times a day, and it seems like it's about how can I not only keep myself honest, but also continue to learn. Right? I'm here to learn, not just about me, but also about you, and learning more about you, about others. That's why I love the title of this exhibition, Me, We. It's really. It's about us, it's about us all together, and how we coexist, and how we manage our relationships, and how we are open to each other, how we make room for each other, how we feel vulnerable enough to share. And, this exhibition and this year has certainly brought that really close.
Yeah, I think this experience definitely gave me a larger scope of my fellow design students at the time. It also allowed a lot more personal reflection in terms of how I respond to how other people talk about mental health, because I'm very aware of like resources and my own knowledge, but this gave me a lot larger scope of how other people talk about mental health, or how they don't, or what happens when they've had to speak up about mental health. And one of the things I love about being in design is having the space to be wrong and accepting when I'm wrong. So this definitely allowed a lot of places where I could just, learn about people. And as Merijntje said, just listen, be present for people. And yeah, be present.
Will?
I maybe let some of this out of the bag already in the things that I've said, but I think on one level, I don't know, the thing that hits me every time that I interact with any of the work that we've done, and I think being asked to re-engage with the work that we did in the fall, again in the spring, building the exhibition, again to speak today, has brought me back into the importance of also sharing. I mean, I talked a little bit about being there for other people, but also I think there's probably an important side of sharing what I'm feeling with the people that I love that makes me feel better, but also makes them feel better and more connected to me. And this is a personal thing. I'm not saying this is like a universal thing everyone should do. But I don't know, I saw when we were engaging with people in the union, how much of a relief in a way it was for some of the people that like shared their story and then like gave me a hug and I gave them a hug, you know, as they left. You know, it let me kind of share this moment with them, and they seemed like, I don't know, that was an important part of it as well. So I guess the takeaway would be, and one thing I have done, and the one thing that has changed in me since working on this is I've been more honest, I think, when people ask me the question, how am I doing? I don't really say anymore like, oh yeah, I'm good. You know, I'll complain a little bit. And I know that's just like a tiny little thing, but it makes me, I think, be more reflective and more honest with how I am doing myself. And I think I struggle with like identifying feelings. And honestly, that empathy muscle might have strengthened a little bit. And now I, you know, see it a little bit more and I feel it a little bit more. So yeah, it's a small thing.
Awesome. You know, 20 years ago, I left the profession to teach full time, and it was because I am infected with the disease of having to learn. You know, I can't stop that sort of curiosity and that infection. And it wasn't that wasn't being, that there wasn't some satisfying component of it in the profession, but in academia, you know, it's just been so wonderful to be around young minds and things. But certainly over the years, this issue has become more and more palpable within the student body, partially because the current generations are more transparent about this topic, and that's a big part of it. And so it was really important for me to sort of dive into this deeper, because it was happening around me, both with my students, but also in my personal life, and just really needing to know more about it so that I could understand things more, but even more importantly, because it seemed so needed, right? And so, you know, this class just made me big. And
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives and, you know, how the show affected you differently. We have one final question from the audience. So basically, this is from Mary Ann Beecher. How would doing a project like this in the wake of COVID how would it challenge you as a group, or how might it be, you know, different, especially with like getting the results and collecting those?
We might have to do it to find out.
That would be cool.
That's a great question. I think maybe one way I can start to answer it is in the way that I'm teaching 2 classes this semester, and I've found that showing up for my students has changed in mode, but also in the types of things that we talk about, the types of conversations that we have, the way that our our relationship kind of unfolds over a semester. That has changed. And I'd imagine trying to do something like this again in the after times, right? Post COVID, we would have to think how we might try and facilitate a day at the union in a way that's different, you know. But essentially, it's still probably about showing up for people and providing some way for them to feel comfortable enough to open up to us. So it's sort of a non-answer, but
I open up every class since we finished in this class in the end of fall semester 2019. Every class I've opened up with, for the most part, is how do you feel? That's how I begin my class, and I think it's important.
I also think there's an important aspect of circulation, and I think, you know, certainly since COVID, from my angle of things, circulation has become so much more important. Even, you know, knowing that conversations can be had, but they can be, you know, cast out in a variety of ways beyond the ways that we thought were initially possible. And I think that's really critical to this particular conversation as well, is to not have it in isolation, but figure out ways where we can share it very broadly, and where it can continue to roll out and evolve and shift and change and grow. And I think that's part of the obligation in some ways that we have now.
Most definitely. And a final question from Abigail Giesling, really interesting one. Are you guys going to do some type of follow-up and show the impact of this exhibition to the students who first were involved in it? And they're also wondering, was there a second conversation with those students to see if their answers have changed?
Yes and no. Yes, this talk today is about us trying to continue to find a way to have this conversation outside of the gallery. Will and I and the others are also, you know, our goals or our dreams would be that this thing gets packed up, but it doesn't get stored. Actually finds different places around, you know, other campuses around the country, other things where I think this voice is also needing to be heard and and this topic needing to be talked about. We can see ourselves sort of disseminating this information by opening up an exhibit in another location that has some similar spatial qualities to it, right? So that these same kinds of experiences can be shared and then talked about. You know, that certainly is one of our goals for this. I've been writing some papers in the background about this class and about the results, and have been talking in some conferences also, and want to continue to sort of do that, because I think that dissemination makes connections and also shows how important this voice needs to be outside of this sort of locale. So I certainly think that's important. Now, when it comes to the students that we interviewed that day and talked to get all of these voices, we didn't collect really any personal information from them in that way. So it wasn't necessarily, some of them gave us some information, and so those contacts we have and can sort of communicate back with them. But part of this, in order to allow them to feel comfortable to really be transparent, be honest, and sort of allow them to talk to us, was also to allow them to sort of do it anonymously at that moment with us, to have sort of a one-on-one. And it's those one-on-ones where this information comes together. It's that we part of me. It isn't necessarily we, the giant we. It's really we, that sort of personal sort of group of either people you consider friends or ones at the moment that you feel comfortable in sort of letting some of this information out and sharing it. And so that's all part of this as well. And so unfortunately, it doesn't allow us to necessarily communicate back with them. The goal originally was because we told them when the exhibit was going to be that they were going to come see their face, their heads with the faces cut out of it and recognize who they were. They were going to be able to look on the wall and see whether it was one of their little responses that ended up sort of making it out as one of the voices. But you know, that was the part that didn't quite happen just because of the result of everything.
Well, I'm really glad that it can live on in this conversation. And thank you all. Thank you, Will, Maya, Jeff, and Merijntje for talking today, for being just so open and honest, and providing so many great insights on this show. So yeah, that is the conclusion of our talk. Thank you all of the viewers who tuned in today, and thank you all for such a great conversation.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day, everyone.